tell you something that will end my life. Not in the dramatic sense. Not a bullet. Not a car accident made to look like bad luck. Something quieter. Something I've watched happen to 2 other people who tried to talk about Sublevel 8. One of them forgot how to sleep. Not insomnia. He literally forgot what sleep was. Stood in his apartment for 9 days until his legs gave out. The other one is still technically alive, somewhere in a long-term care facility in Maryland. She speaks constantly, a continuous stream of words in a language that 3 separate linguists confirm doesn't exist. But it has grammar, it has structure. She's saying something. Nobody wants to know what. I'm telling you anyway because 3 weeks ago I started hearing the hum. The same hum. And I know what comes after the hum. My name doesn't matter. My clearance level was Indigo 4, which isn't something you'll find in any FOIA request or leaked Pentagon slide deck. It's not military, it's not intelligence. It exists in the kind of administrative no man's land where funding comes from line items buried so deep in the federal budget that the senators who vote on them don't know what they're approving. I worked security at a facility I was told to refer to as the installation. No site name, no coordinates. You went in through a freight elevator disguised as a decommissioned mining shaft somewhere in central Nevada, and you descended for 4 minutes and 30 seconds before the doors opened. I'd been working there for 11 months when they found the section. Let me back up. The installation had 7 sub-levels. That was the architecture. That was what the blueprints showed, or it's what the orientation materials described, and what every badge access terminal confirmed. Sub-level 1 was administrative. Offices, server rooms, a cafeteria that served surprisingly decent food for a place that didn't officially exist. Sub-levels 2 through 5 were research. I didn't know what kind, and I'd learned fast not to ask. The researchers wore color-coded lanyards and talked in shorthand I couldn't follow, and the few times I overheard conversations, they were about things like eigenstate coherence and non-Euclidean spatial folding, which sounded like science fiction until you watched a woman in a lab coat walk into a room on sub-level 3 and come out 14 hours later, convinced that only 6 minutes had passed. And the clock on her phone agreed with her. Sub-level 6 was storage. Long corridors of climate-controlled rooms filled with things I was told not to look at. I looked once. I saw what appeared to be a chair made of a material I couldn't identify. Not metal, not wood, not plastic. It had no shadow. The overhead fluorescents were on, and every other object in that room cast a shadow, but the chair sat in a pool of even light, like the darkness couldn't touch it. I reported it. My supervisor told me the chair was functioning normally and to continue my rounds. Sub-level 7 was mechanical, HVAC systems, electrical infrastructure, water treatment, backup generators. It was the basement of the basement, and it was my primary patrol route. I walked those corridors every night from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., checking gauges, logging readings, and making sure nobody was in a section they weren't supposed to be in. It was boring work, the kind of boring that makes you grateful, because in a place like the installation, boring means safe. For 11 months, sub-level 7 was the bottom. Concrete floor, concrete ceiling, the constant throb of machinery, and below that, bedrock. Solid Nevada desert rock that had been there for 60 million years. Then Marcus Whalen found the door. Whalen was a structural engineer assigned to a routine seismic assessment. The installation sat in a geologically stable zone, but they ran surveys every 18 months, checking for microfractures, subsidence, settling, the normal concerns of maintaining a massive underground structure. He was on sublevel 7 with a ground-penetrating radar unit, mapping density patterns in the floor and walls, when he got a reading that didn't make sense. I was there when it happened. He's not by assignment. My patrol route passed through the east mechanical corridor every 90 minutes, and I happened to be rounding the corner when I heard Whalen say something that stuck with me. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He said very quietly, "That's not right." 2 words. And the way he said them, not confused, not curious, afraid, the way you'd say them if you opened your front door and saw your own car parked in your living room. Not anger, not surprise. Just the flat recognition that reality had made an error. I walked over. He was kneeling next to the south wall of Junction 7C, staring at his radar screen. I asked him what was wrong. "There's a cavity," he said. He pointed at the screen. I didn't understand the readout, but I could see a shape. A dark rectangle on the display, clearly defined. He's maybe 20 feet beyond the wall. "An air pocket?" I said. "No." He ran the scan again. Same result. "Air pockets are irregular. This has corners. This is a room." He reported it immediately. Within 2 hours, Junction 7C was sealed off from general access, and a team from Sublevel 2 arrived with equipment I didn't recognize. They set up what looked like an ultrasonic imaging array and spent the next 6 hours mapping what was behind the wall. I wasn't supposed to be in the loop. I was security, not research. But my patrol route ran through that junction, so I was given a temporary access waiver that let me pass through during scans. And because I was there, I saw the images as they came in. Behind the south wall of Junction 7C, there was a corridor. It extended approximately 40 meters in a straight line, then branched. To beyond the branch, the imaging became unreliable. The team said the radar returns were inconsistent, which I later learned meant the signals were coming back at different speeds, as if the density of the space itself was fluctuating. But the corridor was clear. Clean lines, 90-degree angles, constructed. And it was below sublevel 7. Dr. Aveline Chen, who ran the imaging team, was the one who said it first. She pulled up the facility's master blueprint on her tablet and overlaid it with the scan data. The corridor began exactly where the installation's foundation ended, not in the bedrock beneath it, not carved into the rock. The corridor began at the boundary, as if the installation had been built on top of it, or as if the corridor had grown up to meet the installation's floor, like a root reaching toward water. This isn't in any version of the plans, she said. Not the original construction documents, not the amendments, not even the classified architectural surveys. This space doesn't exist. Whalen asked if it could be a natural formation. Chen looked at him like he'd asked if the moon was made of cheese. It has drywall, she said. The authorization to breach the wall came in 11 hours. I don't know who approved it. My supervisor told me the order came from above Indigo, which meant a clearance level I didn't even have a name for. A demolition team cut a 4x4-foot opening in the south wall using a plasma cutter that took 20 minutes to slice through what should have been 8 inches of reinforced concrete, but turned out to be almost 3 feet of something denser. The material on the interior side of the wall was different from standard concrete. Darker, Ite-grained, ite-grained, ite. I'm sorry, I do that now. Repeat words. It started after I came back from down there. The material was darker, fine-grained. When the cutting team pulled the section free, the edges were warm to the touch, and one of the techs said it smelled like ozone and copper. The piece they removed weighed over 600 pounds. Behind it was the corridor. I need you to understand what it felt like to stand at that opening and look in. The installation was clinical. White walls, fluorescent lights, linoleum floors. It looked like a hospital crossed with a government office building. Functional, sterile, human. The corridor was not human, it was the right shape. The dimensions were normal, maybe 9 feet wide, maybe 8 feet tall, extending into darkness beyond the reach of our flashlights. The walls were smooth. The floor was flat. But the proportions felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Like a drawing of a hallway made by something that had seen hallways but didn't understand why humans built them the way they did. The angles were correct, but the feeling was off. The way a smile is off when someone is smiling because they've been told to and not because they want to. And it was warm, not hot, not uncomfortable. Just warm the way skin is warm. The air that drifted out of the opening was maybe 80 degrees, humid, and it carried a smell I've been trying to describe for weeks. The closest I can get is old pennies, wet clay, and something sweet underneath, like fruit that's just started to turn. Not rotten, not yet, just on the edge. Doctor, Chen sent a remote unit in first, a small wheeled drone with cameras and atmospheric sensors. It traveled 30 meters down the corridor, sending back video in real time. We watched on a monitor set up in the junction. The corridor was featureless for the first 20 meters. Smooth walls, smooth floor, smooth ceiling. No light sources, but the drone's camera was picking up faint illumination from somewhere. The walls themselves seemed to emit a dull reddish glow, so faint you wouldn't notice it unless you turned off every other light source. The atmospheric readings were bizarre. Oxygen was at 19%, breathable, but lower than the installation's maintained 21%. Carbon dioxide was slightly elevated, and there was a trace gas the sensors couldn't identify. Not toxic, as far as the sensors could tell. It just unknown. At 22 meters, the drone reached the first door. It was on the left wall, a standard-looking door, rectangular, hinged, with a handle. But it was made of the same dark material as the walls, and it had no markings. No number, no label, no window. Just a door. Chen directed the drone past it. At 30 meters, the corridor branched, just as the imaging had predicted, left and right. The drone went left. 10 meters further, another door. This one was slightly open. The camera angle shifted as the drone approached. Through the gap, we could see part of a room. There was something on the floor. The camera adjusted its exposure, brightened. It was a desk, an office desk. The kind you'd find in any government building. Gray metal, fake wood top, a rolling chair pushed back from it. On the desk was a computer monitor, in old CRT style, like something from the early 90s. The monitor was on. It displayed a single line of text, green on black, and even on the drone's small camera feed, compressed and slightly pixelated on our monitor. I could read it clearly. Sublevel 8. Active. Day 14,779. I did the math later. 14,779 days. That's 40 years, 5 months, and 14 days. If the counter started on day 1, Then whatever was running on sub-level 8 had been active since March of 1984. The installation was built in 2001. Dr. Chen recalled the drone. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Whalen said, "That's not possible." And Chen replied, "I know." I looked back at the opening in the wall. The faint red glow from the corridor pulsed once. So subtle I almost missed it. Like a heartbeat, and my radio crackled. My supervisor's voice, tight and controlled. "All security personnel to Junction 7C. Full containment protocol. Nobody enters, nobody leaves." I looked at the corridor again. The red glow was slightly brighter than it had been 30 seconds ago. And from somewhere deep inside, far past where the drone had reached, far past the branching corridors and the impossible rooms, I heard something. Not a sound exactly. More like a pressure, a low, subsonic vibration that I felt in my teeth, in my chest, in the base of my skull. The hum. It lasted 3 seconds, then it stopped. And in the silence that followed, I heard the drone's audio feed pick up something else, a sound from the room with the desk. The rolling chair was moving, slowly, sliding across the floor, as if someone unseen had just stood up from it. They sealed the opening with a temporary containment barrier, a pressure-rated polymer membrane stretched across a steel frame, the kind they used between sublevels when they needed to isolate atmospheric zones. It took the containment team 40 minutes to install it. During those 40 minutes, I stood at my post 12 feet from the breach and watched the membrane bow inward, gently, rhythmically, as if sublevel 8 were breathing. Nobody mentioned it. I wrote it in my incident log. The next morning when I checked the digital copy, that entry was gone. Not deleted. There was no gap in the timestamps. It simply hadn't been written. Except I remembered writing it. I remembered the exact words. Membrane exhibits rhythmic inward displacement, approximately 1 centimeter amplitude, interval 4 to 5 seconds. I remembered the way my pen had paused on the word rhythmic because I'd almost written biological instead. The first team went in 19 hours after the breach. I wasn't on the entry team. Security personnel were posted at the containment barrier, 2 of us per shift, with orders to log everyone who entered and exited and to track time of entry to the minute. We were given stopwatches. Physical analog stopwatches. I asked why we couldn't use our phones. My supervisor said, "Digital timepieces have shown inconsistencies in proximity to the anomaly." He said it like he was reading from a card. He probably was. The entry team consisted of 4 people: Dr. Chen, Whalen, a biologist named Dr. Hargrove, whom I'd never seen before, and a security lead named Coffee, who outranked me by 3 clearance grades. And they wore standard hazmat suits, not the full positive pressure type, just filtered respirators and Tyvek coveralls. Each carried a handheld radio, a flashlight, a body camera, and a dosimeter. They were given a 2-hour window. They came back in 43 minutes. I logged their exit times. Chen first, then Hargrove, then Whalen. Coffee came last, walking backward through the membrane, his flashlight aimed down the corridor behind him. He didn't turn around until the barrier was resealed. When he pulled off his respirator, his face was the color of wet concrete. "How long were we in there?" he asked me. I checked my stopwatch. 43 minutes. He looked at his own watch. Then he showed it to me. According to his watch, a mechanical automatic, no battery, and no digital components. They had been inside for 7 hours and 12 minutes. Chen's watch agreed with mine. Hargrove's had stopped completely. Wayland's was running backward. They held a debrief in the junction. I wasn't invited, but sound carries in concrete corridors, and I was 12 feet away with nothing to do but listen. The corridor extended further than the drone had mapped. Much further. The entry team had followed the left branch for what Chen estimated was 200 meters, though Coffee insisted it was closer to 400. They'd found 14 doors. They'd opened 6 of them. 3 were offices. Not modern offices, the furniture was utilitarian mid-century government issue. Metal desks, filing cabinets, rotary phones. Each office had a CRT monitor, and each monitor displayed the same format. Sub-level 8, active, day, followed by a number. But the numbers were different. One read 14,779, matching the first monitor the drone had found. Another read 22,416. A third read 3 days. That room looked newer. The desk had a coffee mug on it, and Hargrove said the coffee inside was still warm. The fourth room was a laboratory. Chen described it in clinical terms, but her voice shook. The lab contained equipment she recognized: spectrometers, centrifuges, oscilloscopes, but the configurations were wrong. Instruments were connected in ways that didn't serve any function she could identify. Cables ran from a mass spectrometer into what appeared to be a medical IV stand. A centrifuge had been modified to hold not sample tubes but small glass spheres filled with a dark liquid that moved too slowly to be water. On the counter there were notebooks, handwritten. The handwriting was neat, precise, and in English, but the content was impenetrable. Equations that used symbols Chen didn't recognize, interspersed with what she called observational notes, written in a style that was almost, but not quite, scientific. One entry read, "Subject maintains coherence at 7.3 Hertz. Boundary expression nominal. Appetite increasing. Fed at 1400. Responded to name." There was no indication of what the subject was, or what it had been fed. The fifth room was empty. Perfectly, immaculately empty. No dust, no marks on the floor. The walls, ceiling, and floor were the same dark material as the corridor, seamless, as if the room had been carved from a single block. But the room was cold. Not slightly cool, genuinely cold, enough that Hargrove could see his breath, and the room was the wrong size. This was the detail that made Coffee's hands shake as he described it. From the corridor, the door suggested a room roughly 12 by 12 feet. Standard. When they entered, the room was at least 50 feet across in every direction. The ceiling was so high, their flashlights couldn't find it. Coffee had paced the exterior wall of the corridor and confirmed that the room, from the outside, occupied no more than a 12-foot span. The space inside was physically impossible. They hadn't opened the 6th door. They'd intended to, but when Coffee reached for the handle, Wayland grabbed his arm and said, "Listen." From behind the 6th door, they heard the hum. The same low subsonic pressure I'd felt at the breach, but closer, focused. And underneath it, Wayland said, there was a pattern, not random vibration, and structured, repetitive, like speech played at a frequency below human hearing, like something on the other side of the door talking in a voice made of pressure instead of sound. They left after that. I listened to all of this From my post, I logged it in my head because I no longer trusted the written logs, and I noted something none of them mentioned in the debrief. When the team had entered sub-level 8, the red glow from the corridor had been faint, barely visible. When they came out 43 minutes later, or 7 hours later, depending on whose watch you believed, the glow was brighter, strong enough to cast shadows on the containment membrane. Strong enough that I could see it through the polymer, a dull crimson pulse that hadn't been there before. Sub-level 8 was waking up. The next 3 days followed a pattern that I recognized from 11 months of working at the installation. The machinery of classification grinding into motion. Additional personnel arrived. I counted 17 new faces over 72 hours, all with clearance levels I couldn't verify. Equipment was brought down in cargo elevators, monitoring stations, atmospheric analyzers, a portable MRI unit that I couldn't imagine a use for underground. Junction 7C was transformed from a mechanical crossroads into a forward operating base. I was reassigned from general patrol to permanent containment watch. 12-hour shifts, midnight to noon, stationed at the barrier with one other guard. My new partner was a woman named Vasquez who transferred from sub-level 3. She didn't talk much. On our second shift together, she told me she'd requested the transfer because she'd started dreaming about something she'd seen in one of the sub-level 3 labs and wanted to be as far from it as possible. She didn't tell me what she'd seen. I didn't ask. We stared at the membrane and listened to sub-level 8 breathe. On the 4th day, they sent a second team in. Larger this time. 6 people, including 2 I was told were linguists. They were inside for 3 hours by my stopwatch. When they came back, one of the linguists was crying, not sobbing, tears running silently down her face while she spoke in a calm, professional voice about what she'd found. They'd gone further than the first team, past the branching corridor and past the offices and the lab and the impossible room, deeper into a section where the architecture began to change. The corridors narrowed, the ceilings dropped. The walls, still smooth, began to curve inward, and the red glow intensified until flashlights became unnecessary. The air was warmer, wetter. The smell, pennies and clay and sweet decay, was stronger, thick enough to taste. At approximately 300 meters from the breach, they found a chamber. The linguist described it as a room designed by something that had studied rooms, circular, maybe 40 feet in diameter. The walls were covered in markings, not carved, not painted, but part of the wall itself, raised from the surface like veins under skin. The markings formed patterns that the linguists immediately recognized as writing, or though neither could identify the language. It wasn't any known script, it wasn't any known language family, but it had consistent character forms, repeated structures, and what appeared to be punctuation. It was language. Something had written on these walls, and it was extensive. The markings covered every surface, walls, floor, ceiling, thousands of characters dense and overlapping in places, as if whoever had written them had run out of space and started layering new text over old. The linguist estimated there were at least 50,000 individual characters. She was crying because she could almost read it. Not consciously. She couldn't identify a single character. But standing in that chamber, surrounded by the text, she said she could feel meaning pressing against the inside of her skull. It's like a word on the tip of your tongue. Except it was every word. An entire language trying to force itself into her mind through a door that wasn't quite wide enough. She requested immediate removal from the project. It was denied. That night, my fifth shift at the barrier, I felt the hum again. Stronger than before, it came in waves, each one slightly longer, slightly more defined. And Vasquez felt it too, because she looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Is it getting louder?" It was. But that wasn't what concerned me. What concerned me was that the hum had a direction. I could feel it pushing against the left side of my face, like standing next to a speaker at low volume. And when I turned my head, it tracked. It wasn't ambient. It wasn't coming from everywhere. It was coming from the barrier, from the corridor behind it, from somewhere deep in sub-level 8. And it was aimed at me. I reported this. My supervisor took the report, read it, and said, "You're describing psychoacoustic suggestion resulting from prolonged subsonic exposure. It's a known phenomenon." He said I should wear earplugs. I wore the earplugs. They didn't help. The hum wasn't sound, it was pressure. It passed through the foam like it wasn't there, settled into my molars, into the plates of my skull, into the small bones of my inner ear. And now, with the earplugs blocking ambient noise, I could hear something else inside it. Vasquez had asked if it was getting louder. It wasn't louder. It was getting more complex. There were layers in it, harmonics, patterns that shifted and recombined like, and I know how this sounds, like sentences. The hum was talking. On day 6, they found the file room. A third team, this one accompanied by 2 armed security officers with sidearms. A first, because weapons were generally prohibited below sub-level 4. They pushed past the circular chamber, through a section of corridor where the walls had become so organic in their curvature that the team leader described them as intestinal, and into a room that stopped everyone cold. Filing cabinets, hundreds of them. Standard government issue filing cabinets, green-gray metal, 4 drawers each, arranged in rows that stretched beyond the team's flashlights. The room was enormous. Scans later estimated it at over 12,000 square feet, a space that could not physically fit within the facility's footprint. And every cabinet was full. The files were personnel records, thousands of them. Each folder contained a name, a photograph, a date of birth, a clearance level, an assignment history, and a date of transfer to sub-level 8. The photographs were standard ID badge photos, plain background, neutral expression. The assignment histories were detailed. These people had worked at the installation. They had names I could check, but I couldn't check them because the dates were wrong. The earliest transfer date in the files they sampled was June 1951. The most recent was February 2024, 8 months in the future. Dr. Chen pulled a file at random. She opened it, read the name, and dropped it. I heard about this secondhand from Coffee, who told me during a shift change with the careful, measured speech of someone trying very hard not to scream. The file Chen had pulled was her own, her photograph, her date of birth, her clearance level. It's her assignment history, accurate down to the date she'd been brought onto the sub-level 8 investigation. And at the bottom of the page, a transfer date, April 14th, 2024, 12 days from now. She'd pulled 3 more files before the team lead ordered everyone out. 2 belonged to people she didn't recognize. The third was Marcus Whalen's. His transfer date was listed as April 9th, 5 days away. The file room had other features they hadn't had time to catalog, but Coffee told me one more detail before he stopped talking about it entirely. In the back of the room, past the rows of cabinets, there was a wall. On the wall was a window. Through the window you could see another room, a room with a single chair in it, facing the glass, as if designed for observation. The chair was occupied. It's whatever was sitting in it wasn't visible on the body camera footage when they reviewed it later. The cameras showed an empty chair. But 4 members of the 6-person team confirmed, independently, that they had seen a figure, tall, still, facing the window, and it was smiling. When I arrived for my shift that night, the red glow from behind the barrier was no longer subtle. It bled through the polymer membrane in arterial waves, painting the junction walls in rhythmic crimson. My stopwatch was running 3 seconds fast per hour. The hum was constant now. Not pulsing, not waving, just there. A permanent pressure that I felt in the roots of my teeth. Vasquez didn't show up for her shift. I was told she'd been reassigned. I asked where. Nobody answered. Her badge was still in the system, but her access log showed her last scan at 3:47 a.m. the previous night, entering Junction 7C. There was no exit scan. According to the system, Vasquez had walked into the junction and never left. I stood alone at the barrier for 12 hours. Behind me, the installation hummed with fluorescent normalcy. In front of me, Sublevel 8 pulsed and breathed and glowed. And sometime around 4 a.m., when the corridors were empty and the only sound was the thrum of machinery and the pressure of the hum against my skull, I heard a new sound from behind the membrane. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming up the corridor toward the barrier. They stopped on the other side of the membrane. I could see a shadow through the polymer. A shape. Upright. Human-sized. Standing 3 feet away from me with only a sheet of industrial plastic between us. It stood there for 90 seconds. I counted. I couldn't move. I couldn't reach for my radio. The hum was so loud inside my head that I could feel it rearranging my thoughts, pushing them aside to make room for something else. A word. A single word that wasn't mine, that I didn't think, that appeared in my mind the way a bruise appears on skin, slowly, then all at once. Soon. The shadow turned. The footsteps receded. The hum dropped back to its baseline. I checked the body cameras in the junction. All 6 had experienced simultaneous malfunctions between 3:58 and 4:02 a.m. 4 minutes of dead footage. Whatever had stood on the other side of that membrane didn't want to be recorded, but it wanted to be seen. It wanted me to know it was coming. April 9th came on a Wednesday. I know because I'd been counting. And since Coffee told me about Omid Whalen's file, the transfer date, the clean bureaucratic certainty of it, I'd been watching the calendar with the particular attention of a man standing on railroad tracks, listening for a train. 5 days, then 4, then 3. Each shift at the barrier felt like sitting in a waiting room for something I couldn't name and couldn't stop. Whalen knew too. He'd seen his own file. He knew what the date said, and for those 5 days I watched him try to behave as if knowledge were armor, as if understanding the threat made him safe from it. He kept working. He ran structural scans on the areas adjacent to the breach, mapping the boundary between the installation's foundation and whatever Sublevel 8 was built from. He filed reports. He ate in the cafeteria. He made small talk with the research staff. And every few hours, I'd catch him standing still in a corridor, staring at nothing, his lips moving without sound, as if he were rehearsing an argument of something that hadn't arrived yet. On April 8th, Waylon came to my post at the barrier. It was 2 a.m. He wasn't supposed to be on sublevel 7. His access had been restricted to sublevels 1 through 5 after the file room discovery, a precaution that struck me as absurd, like locking the front door of a house with no walls. But there he was, badge scan be damned, standing in the crimson glow of Junction 7C with a look on his face that I recognized because I'd seen it in my own mirror. The expression of someone who has accepted something they cannot say out loud. "Have you checked?" he asked. I knew what he meant. "No." "You should." He paused. You need to know your date." "I don't want to know my date." He almost smiled. That's what Chen said, before she went back in to look. This was news. Chen went back into the file room. Yesterday, alone, she was inside for 20 minutes by the stopwatch. When she came out, she wouldn't tell anyone what she'd found. But she made 3 phone calls. Personal phone, not installation comms. And then she went to her quarters and hasn't come out since. He looked at the membrane. The red glow pulsed against it, slow and steady. "I think she found more files. I think she found someone she didn't expect." He left after that. Walked back down the corridor toward the freight elevator, his footsteps fading into the mechanical hum of sublevel 7. I watched him go and thought about what he'd said, about dates, about the files. I did not check. I want you to understand that. I did not go into sublevel 8. I did not open a filing cabinet. I did not look for my name. What I know about my own file, I learned later, and I learned it in a way that was worse than finding it myself. April 9th, Wednesday, Waylon's transfer date. He was in the cafeteria at 7 a.m., eating scrambled eggs. 3 people confirmed this. He was in the structural engineering lab on sublevel 2 at 8:15 reviewing scan data. His badge logged him there. At 9:02, he left the lab and took the freight elevator down. His badge scanned at sublevel 4, then sublevel 5, then sublevel 6, then sublevel 8. There was no badge reader for sublevel 8. There was no official access point. The only entrance was the breach in Junction 7C, monitored by whatever security guard was on shift. At 9:02, I was off duty. Where the day shift guard was a man named Pryor. I found Pryor's log later, or what was left of it. At 9:14 a.m., Pryor logged Marcus Waylon entering Junction 7C. At 9:15, he logged Waylon approaching the containment barrier. At 9:16, he noted that Waylon placed both hands on the polymer membrane and pushed. The membrane opened for him. That's what Pryor wrote. Not that Waylon cut it, not that he forced it, not that there was a failure in the seal. The membrane opened. It parted down the center in a clean vertical line, the polymer separating as if it had been designed to do so, as if the barrier had always been a door and Waylon had simply been the first person to knock correctly. Pryor did not attempt to stop him. In his log, he wrote, "Guard Pryor observed subject enter the corridor. Guard Pryor did not intervene." Guard Pryor was unable to intervene. Guard Pryor does not remember why. The membrane resealed behind Waylon. The body cameras in the junction captured the entire event. This time, they didn't malfunction. The footage showed Waylon walking calmly into the red glow, his silhouette shrinking with distance, his stride measured and purposeful, like a man walking to a meeting he was late for. He did not look back. 18 seconds after he entered, the hum spiked. Every person on sub-level 7 felt it. It rattled tools on workbenches. It cracked the screen of a monitoring station. It lasted 4 seconds. And within those 4 seconds, 3 people in different parts of the installation reported hearing the same thing. A voice, deep and resonant and coming from everywhere at once, saying a single word, Waylon's first name, Marcus, and then silence, complete silence. The hum didn't just stop, it withdrew, pulling back like a tide, and for 30 seconds, sub-level 7 was quieter than I'd ever experienced it. No machinery noise, no ventilation, no electrical buzz. Every system on the sub-level had stopped simultaneously. When they restarted, Waylon was gone. He has not been seen since. His personnel file in the installation's database was updated automatically at 9:17 a.m., 1 minute after he passed through the barrier. His status changed from active to transferred. His assigned sub-level changed from 2 to 8. The system knew. Whatever managed the installation's records, whatever database tracked personnel assignments, it recognized sub-level 8 as a valid location. It processed the transfer like routine paperwork. Waylon hadn't disappeared. He'd been reassigned. Yet I arrived for my shift that night and found Junction 7C transformed. The temporary monitoring stations had been replaced with permanent installations, bolted to the floor, hardwired into the installation's power grid. A second containment barrier had been erected 6 feet behind the first, creating an airlock-style buffer zone. Armed guards were posted at both ends of the corridor leading to the junction. Not security staff, military, uniformed, carrying rifles, wearing patches I didn't recognize. The red glow behind the barrier was different. Stronger, yes. Bright enough now to read by. A deep, arterial crimson that made everything it touched look like it was bleeding. But it was also steadier. The breathing rhythm was gone. The light was constant, unwavering. As if whatever had been sleeping behind those walls was now fully awake and no longer needed to pulse. I took my position between the 2 barriers. My orders were unchanged. Log entries and exits, track time, report anomalies. The earplugs I'd been given sat in my pocket. Useless. The hum was back, stronger than before Waylon's entry, and it had changed. The layered harmonics I'd noticed before were more defined now, more structured. I could almost feel the edges of individual sounds within it, discrete packets of vibration that repeated and varied the way phonemes do, the way syllables do. The hum wasn't just talking anymore, it was talking to me specifically, and I was beginning to understand it. Not the content, not words, but the intent. But the way you can tell someone is asking a question, even when they're speaking a language you don't know. The rising inflection, the pause that waits for a response. The hum would press against my skull in a particular pattern, and I would feel the shape of a question, an inquiry, patient, repeated. It wanted something from me, and the worst part, the part I haven't told anyone, the part I'm telling you now because there is no one left to tell, is that I could feel myself wanting to answer. There was a place inside my chest, just below my sternum, where the hum seemed to collect, to pool, to resonate. And from that place, something wanted to rise up through my throat and out of my mouth, a response, a sound I didn't know, a word in a language I'd never learned. I kept my mouth shut. I ground my teeth together until I tasted blood, and I watched the barrier and counted the hours. On April 11th, Chen's transfer date was 3 days away, and she finally emerged from her quarters, She looked like she hadn't slept in 48 hours. She came directly to the junction there, bypassed the military checkpoints with a clearance code that made the soldiers step aside without a word, and stood in front of the first barrier, bathed in red light, staring at the membrane. I was on shift. She didn't acknowledge me for almost 10 minutes. Then, without turning around, she said, "There are 412 active personnel files in the sublevel 8 cabinet designated for this installation." I didn't respond. I counted them. 412 files, each with a name, a photograph, and a transfer date. 83 of those dates have already passed. Yes, the earliest was in 1951. The most recent was Marcus. She paused. The remaining 329 files have future dates. Every single person currently working in this installation has a file. Every single one. Did you find mine? The words came out before I could stop them. She turned to look at me. In the red light, her face was a mask of shadows and crimson. I found everyone's, including mine. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to me. I didn't take it. "I don't want to know." "You already know," she said. "You've known since it started talking to you." The paper hung in the air between us. The hum swelled, pressing against the inside of my skull, and in that pressure I felt something new. Not a question this time. An answer. A date that appeared in my mind, the way the word soon had. Took unwanted, uninvited, absolutely certain. April 19th. 8 days from now. Chen watched my face and saw the recognition. She lowered the paper. "You heard it. I felt it. That's how it starts. That's how it started for Waylon. He told me the night before." Her voice cracked. "He told me he could feel his date. Like a heartbeat. Like it was already inside him counting down." She put the paper back in her pocket. She stood at the barrier for another hour, silent, watching the red glow. Then she left. At the door, she stopped and said, "The files go both ways." I asked what she meant. "The cabinets aren't just for us. There's a second set. Behind the first row, against the back wall, older cabinets, different labels." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "Ejit, those files aren't about people transferring in. They're about something transferring out." She left before I could ask what. That night, alone at the barrier, I felt the hum change again. The questioning pattern was gone, replaced by something slower, deeper, more patient. If the earlier hum had been inquiry, this was anticipation. The particular vibration of something that has waited a very long time and knows it is about to stop waiting. At 3:33 a.m., the lights on sublevel 7 flickered. All of them. A simultaneous stutter that lasted less than a second. When they came back on, the junction looked different, and it took me a moment to understand why. The first containment barrier, the polymer membrane closest to the breach, was gone. Not torn, not collapsed. Gone. The steel frame stood empty, the polymer simply absent, as if it had never been installed. The bolts were still in place. The attachment points still held fragments of adhesive, but the membrane itself had vanished. Beyond the empty frame, the corridor of sublevel 8 stretched into red darkness. I could see further than before. The glow was bright enough to illuminate 30 or 40 feet of hallway, smooth walls curving gently, the floor reflecting crimson light, like wet glass. and the air that flowed through the open frame was warm and humid, and it smelled like pennies and clay and something sweet. And underneath those smells, something new, something alive. Not rot, not decay, the opposite. The dense, heavy, unmistakable smell of biological warmth. The way a room smells when it's been occupied by something large and breathing. The smell of a body, not a dead body. A living one, something massive and warm and close. I radioed for support. Nobody responded. I checked my radio, functional. I tried again on the emergency frequency, static. I tried my personal phone. No signal. I was alone at the barrier with an open corridor leading into the impossible and no way to contact anyone. The hum was louder now. Not uncomfortable. Almost gentle. The way a purr is gentle. The way a lullaby is gentle. It pressed against my thoughts, and I felt the resonance in my chest strengthen, the unspoken word rising in my throat. My jaw ached from clenching. My teeth throbbed with subsonic pressure. And from somewhere down the corridor, not far, not the deep reaches where the file room and the circular chamber waited, but close, maybe 50 feet from where I stood, I heard a new sound. Breathing. Not mine. Not the rhythmic pulse of the barrier that I'd been watching for days. Something else. Something with lungs. Slow, deliberate inhalation and exhalation, each breath lasting 5 or 6 seconds. The sound wet and deep and resonant in the corridor's acoustics. And between breaths, in the silence of the pause, footsteps. 1, 2, 3. Closer. The second barrier was still intact behind me. I could retreat. I could turn around, pass through the airlock, walk away. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to put as many walls and doors and sub-levels between me and whatever was breathing in that corridor. But the hum held me. It was inside my chest now, vibrating in my ribs, in my spine, in the frequency of my own heartbeat. And the word in my throat had risen to the base of my tongue, pressing against my clenched teeth. And I realized with a horror that went beyond fear into something chemical, something cellular, that the word wasn't trying to escape. It was already there. It had always been there. I'd been speaking it my whole life, in the rhythm of my breathing, in the pattern of my heartbeat, in the electrical impulse of every thought I'd ever had. The hum wasn't teaching me a new language. It was reminding me of one I'd been born knowing. The footsteps stopped. The breathing stopped. The red glow intensified, and in that light, I saw a shadow on the corridor wall, tall, still. The shape of a person standing just around the curve, just beyond the edge of visibility, waiting. And on the wall beside the shadow, where there had been smooth, featureless material an hour ago, there were markings. The same raised, or vein-like script from the circular chamber, spreading across the surface like frost on a window, growing. The writing was growing up the corridor toward the breach, toward the installation, toward me. Characters I couldn't read, but could almost feel, each one pressing meaning against my skull, like fingers pressing against the inside of a balloon. I closed my eyes. I pressed my palms against my ears. I held my breath. The hum said my name. Not the word soon, not a question. My name. My actual name in my own voice, spoken from the other side of a wall that was no longer there. I opened my eyes. The shadow was gone. The breathing had stopped. The corridor was empty. But the markings on the wall remained. and they were 6 feet closer to the breach than they had been 30 seconds ago. Sublevel 8 was growing. It 3 more people transferred before Chen. I didn't witness the first 2. They happened during the day shift. A lab technician from sublevel 3 and a maintenance worker from sublevel 6. Both walked into Junction 7C under their own power, passed through the remaining barrier, and entered the corridor. The security footage showed them walking calmly, steadily, with the unhurried gait of someone going somewhere they'd agreed to go. Neither spoke. Neither hesitated. The membrane opened for them the way it had opened for Waylon, a clean vertical parting, as if the barrier recognized them and had been waiting. The third was Dr. Hargrove, the biologist from the first entry team. He transferred at 4:17 a.m. on April 13th, during my shift. I watched him do it. He came down the corridor in his lab coat, badge still clipped to his pocket, a half-eaten granola bar in his left hand. He looked at me as he passed my station. His expression was calm. Not blank, not vacant. Calm, in the way that a person is calm when they've made a decision that resolves every anxiety they've ever carried. He looked peaceful. He looked relieved. "It's not what you think it is," he said. I asked him what he meant. "The section, sublevel 8. He stopped in front of the barrier. The red glow painted him in crimson, filled the creases of his face, turned his lab coat the color of watered-down blood. "We keep calling it that. Sublevel 8. Like it's an extension of this place. Like it's a room we haven't cataloged yet." He shook his head. "It's the other way around." The membrane parted. Warm air poured through the gap, carrying the smell of copper and clay and the sweet or heavy scent of something breathing. Hargrove stepped through. He didn't look back. The membrane closed behind him and the hum pulsed once. A deep, satisfied vibration that I felt in the architecture of my bones. His status in the personnel database updated 12 seconds later. Active to transferred. Sublevel assigned. 8. And now his words lived inside me, burrowing alongside the hum. It's the other way around. Chen transferred on April 14th, her date, right on schedule. She didn't come to the junction. She didn't walk through the barrier. At 6 a.m., I ended my shift and walked past her quarters on the way to the dormitory. Her door was open. Her room was empty. Not cleared out, but empty the way a room is empty when the person in it has simply ceased to be there. Her clothes were in the closet. Her laptop was open on the desk, aimed at the screen displaying her email inbox. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, still cold, a ring of condensation on the wood. But Chen was gone. And on the wall above her bed, raised from the surface like a scar, was a single line of the script from sublevel 8. One sentence, if that's what it was. 7 characters in the vein-like writing, dark against the institutional white paint. They hadn't been carved or drawn. They'd grown through the wall the way the rest of the writing had been growing, spreading up through the corridor, through the breach, through the concrete and rebar, and into the installation itself. Sublevel 8 wasn't just behind the barrier anymore. It was in the walls. Over the next 2 days, the writing appeared in 11 more locations throughout the installation. Sublevel 7, Sublevel 6, the stairwell between 5 and 4, into the cafeteria ceiling on Sublevel 1. Always the same, Sec. Characters raised from the surface of walls, floors, ceilings, emerging from the material as if they'd always been embedded there, and were only now rising to visibility. The linguist who'd cried in the circular chamber was brought in to examine them. She lasted 20 minutes before she began reciting characters aloud in a language she didn't speak, her voice flat and rhythmic, her eyes unfocused. They sedated her and moved her to the medical ward. By the next morning, the sedation had stopped working. She was still reciting. She hasn't stopped. The installation was emptying. Not all at once. The transfers were staggered, scattered across departments and sub-levels, following no pattern I could discern except the dates in the files. Every morning, another absence. Another door left open, another workstation abandoned mid-task, another name in the database clicking over from active to transferred. The military personnel posted at the junction checkpoints were reduced from 8 to 4, then from 4 to 2. I never saw the missing soldiers leave. They were simply not there anymore. The red glow had spread beyond Junction 7C. It was in the corridors now. A faint blush at the edges of the fluorescent lighting, a warmth in the color temperature that made the white walls look flushed, feverish. The installation's environmental systems were struggling. Temperatures on the lower sub-levels had risen 4 degrees. Humidity was up 15%. The air tasted different, thicker, wetter. You're carrying that sweetness that I now associated with the smell of sub-level 8, the way you associate a perfume with a person. The installation was being digested, and the hum was everywhere. It had saturated the structure, embedded itself in the concrete and steel and wiring, so that every surface vibrated at its frequency. You could press your hand against any wall on any sub-level and feel it, a living tremor, a pulse. The installation had a heartbeat, and it wasn't the generators. On April 16th, I tried to leave. I took the freight elevator to the surface. The doors opened on the mining shaft. The same corrugated metal walls, the same industrial lighting, the same gravel path leading to the surface access point. I walked 50 feet up the shaft and found a door that shouldn't have been there. Not the surface exit, a different door. Same dark material as the sub-level 8 corridors. Same featureless surface. Same handle. It was set into the shaft wall where there had previously been solid rock, and the red glow bled from its edges like light through the seams of an oven. I turned around. Went back to the elevator. Pressed the button for sub-level 1. The elevator descended for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the standard duration for a trip to the bottom of the installation. The doors opened. The corridor outside was sub-level 1. White walls, fluorescent lights, linoleum floor. Except the cafeteria was on the wrong side. The administrative offices were where the server room should have been. And at the far end of the corridor, where the secondary elevator bank had always been, there was a wall. Just a wall. Smooth, featureless, and when I pressed my hand against it, warm. I took the elevator back up. Tried sub-level 3. The doors opened on a corridor that curved where it should have been straight. Sub-level 5 was correct in layout, but the ceiling was 2 feet lower than it should have been, and getting lower as I watched. Not collapsing, not falling, but growing downward, the way a stalactite grows, slowly and with geological patience. I went back to the elevator and stood inside it and felt the walls hum against my shoulder blades and understood, with the cold clarity of a man watching water rise around his ankles in a locked room, that the installation was no longer the installation. It was becoming sub-level 8. Or it had always been sublevel 8, and the installation, the offices, the labs, the cafeteria, in the 7 neat sublevels with their badge readers and fluorescent lights, had been the anomaly. A bubble of order in something much older and much larger. And now the bubble was collapsing. Hargrove's words. It's the other way around. Not a section that shouldn't exist beneath the facility. A facility that shouldn't exist above the section. We hadn't discovered sublevel 8. Sublevel 8 had tolerated us, the way a body tolerates a splinter, until it was ready to absorb us. The breach in Junction 7C wasn't an opening we'd made. It was a scab we'd picked. I went back to sublevel 7. My post. The junction, the barrier, still standing. The last membrane between the original architecture and the corridor beyond, though the distinction was becoming academic. The red glow on both sides was nearly identical now. The writing covered the junction walls in dense, overlapping script. Characters layered on characters. A palimpsest of meaning that pressed against my mind with physical weight. 17 people remained in the installation. I knew this because I'd checked the personnel database, and 17 entries still read, active. 17 out of the 412 that Chen had counted. The rest had transferred one by one on their assigned dates, absorbed into the section below with the silent efficiency of a system processing paperwork. My date was 3 days away. I spent those 3 days at the barrier. Not because I was on shift. The shift schedule had dissolved, along with the chain of command and the operational protocols and every other structure that humans had imposed on this place. Yet I stayed because there was nowhere else to go. The elevator still functioned, but the sublevels it opened onto were increasingly wrong. Sublevel 2 was a single corridor that stretched for what felt like miles, lined with doors, each one slightly ajar, each one breathing warm air. Sublevel 4 was gone entirely. The elevator doors opened on a wall of dark material, smooth and warm and covered in script. The surface shaft was blocked by 3 more doors that hadn't existed a week ago. We were sealed in or sealed with. The remaining 17 became 12, then 9, then 6. I stopped tracking names. The transfers happened at all hours, without ceremony, without resistance. People simply walked into the red glow and didn't come back. And the database updated, and the hum pulsed, with that deep satisfaction, and the writing spread another few feet along the walls. On April 18th, 1 day before my date, I was alone in the junction when I heard footsteps in the corridor behind the barrier. The same slow, measured pace I'd heard before. But this time, more than one set. Multiple footfalls, overlapping. A small crowd, walking in unison. Their steps synchronized to the rhythm of the hum. The membrane parted. Not for me, I hadn't touched it. It opened on its own, a clean vertical split, and the warm air poured through, and in the red glow of the corridor beyond, I saw them. Silhouettes. 5, 6, maybe more, standing in the corridor at varying distances, all facing me. Human-shaped. Human-sized. Still, the way the figure in the chair had been still, like not frozen, not rigid, but settled, not like something that had found its place and had no reason to move. I recognized the nearest one by the outline of his shoulders, by the way he stood with his weight slightly on his left foot, the old habit of a man with a bad right knee. Waylon. He was smiling. They were all smiling. The same smile, not threatening, not predatory, welcoming. The smile of someone standing at an arrival gate, waiting for a passenger they've been expecting. Behind them, deeper in the corridor, I could see the walls moving. The script was alive. Characters shifting, rearranging, flowing across the surface in patterns that pulsed with the hum. And in those patterns, I could finally read something. Not the language. I still couldn't parse the characters, but the intent, the meaning beneath the meaning, and the thing the hum had been trying to tell me since the first night. It wasn't malice. That's what I need you to understand. There was no hatred in Sublevel 8, no hunger, no cruelty. What I felt from the hum, from the writing, from the red glow, and the warm air, and the figures standing in the corridor with their welcoming smiles, it was patience. The vast, inhuman patience of something that has existed for so long that human timescales are meaningless to it. It had waited for us to build our installation on top of it. It had waited for us to find the wall. It had waited for us to breach it. And now it was waiting for us to come home. Because that's what the files meant. That's what the transfer dates were. Not abductions, not disappearances, appointments, homecomings. The personnel files weren't a threat. They were an itinerary. And the section that shouldn't exist wasn't an anomaly beneath our facility. It was the original structure, the first building, the foundation on which everything, not just the installation, but everything above it, the bedrock, the desert, the sky, had been built. And the things standing in the corridor weren't monsters. They were employees. They'd accepted their transfer dates. They'd gone home. The membrane stayed open. The figures waited. The hum resonated in my chest, and the word that had been living in my throat for days rose to the surface, and this time I didn't clench my jaw. I let it come. I opened my mouth and spoke a single syllable in a language I'd never learned, and the sound of it was the hum, the exact frequency, the exact resonance. And the figures in the corridor nodded, all of them, in unison, as if I'd answered a question correctly. My date was tomorrow. I closed my mouth. I stepped back. The membrane sealed. The figures disappeared into the red glow, and I stood in Junction 7C, alone, and made the only decision I've ever made that I'm certain was wrong. I ran. Not through the elevator. The elevator was Sublevel 8 now. Just another corridor, wearing the skin of something familiar. I went up through the maintenance shafts, the narrow service crawlways between sublevels that were used for cable routing and emergency access. I climbed. The shafts were tight, concrete and metal, and for the first 3 sublevels, they were still themselves, still installation architecture, still human. But by sublevel 3, the walls were warm. By sublevel 2, the writing was there, glowing faintly in the darkness. By sublevel 1, each of the shaft smelled like copper and clay and sweetness and breath. I found a surface hatch, an emergency exit manually operated that opened onto the desert floor half a mile from the mining shaft entrance. It was 4 a.m. on April 19th. My date. The sky was dark and full of stars, and the air was cold and dry, and it smelled like dust and sage and nothing else. I walked. I walked until the sun came up, and then I kept walking until I reached a road, and then I stood on the shoulder and waited until a truck stopped. The driver asked me if I was all right. I said I was. He drove me to the nearest town. I bought a bus ticket. I left Nevada. That was 3 weeks ago. I am telling you this from a motel room in a state I won't name. I have not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since I left the installation. I eat when I remember to, and I check the walls every morning for markings, and every morning they're clean, and every morning I am less relieved by this than I should be, because the hum followed me, It's faint, barely there. A whisper of pressure at the base of my skull. A vibration so subtle, I might be imagining it. But I'm not imagining it. I know its texture. I know its rhythm. I know its patience. It's there when I wake up and there when I lie down. And it is exactly as loud as it was the first night I heard it in Junction 7C, and it has not gotten louder, and it has not gotten softer. And this is what frightens me most. It's waiting. My transfer date was April 19th. I didn't go. I ran. And the hum didn't stop. The system didn't care that I missed my appointment. It simply noted the delay and continued. The way a clock continues. The way a calendar continues. The way something that has waited for 40 years can wait a little longer. I check the walls every morning. This morning I found something. Not on the wall. On me. On the inside of my left forearm, where there had been bare skin yesterday, there is now a mark. Small. Raised. The color of a vein under pale skin. A single character in a script I can't read, but can almost feel. It wasn't there yesterday. The hum is a little louder tonight. I think the transfer date isn't a deadline. It's a process. And the process doesn't require me to walk into a corridor or pass through a membrane or descend into the dark. The process is already happening, has been happening, since the first night the hum pressed itself into my skull and settled in. Sublevel 8 isn't a place I escaped from. It's a place I'm carrying with me. It's growing inside me the way the writing grew inside the walls. Slowly, patiently, one character at a time. I keep my mouth shut. I clench my jaw. But the word is still there, on my tongue, warm and resonant and waiting. And every night it gets a little easier to say.